welcome to the Warm and Fuzzy Book Club, the podcast that embraces the cliches, falls into the suspension of disbelief and celebrates the diversity of romantic fiction. So grab a cup of whatever you like, curl up in your favourite chair and join me to talk books. Hi there, welcome to the Warm and Fuzzy Book Club. I'm your host as always, Corey, and it's lovely to have you here. How are you doing today? So, it looks like we're getting into Christmas time, everybody, and I don't know about you, but I've started building my TBR pile for December, and I've kind of overdone it, as I usually do, and I've got a huge pile of books sitting in front of me right now. So I thought rather than doing some new recommendations, I would kind of go through my TBR pile just to tell you what I'm going to be reading this Christmas time. So firstly, I'll deal with a couple of crime because I do love a cosy crime at Christmas, so I've got a couple of crime books in the mix. So I've got Murder at Mistletoe Manor by E.L. Everett. Looks like a typical, kind of crime Christmas time book where a group of strangers stay in a luxury hotel and they get caught in a snowstorm and they get stuck and somebody turns up dead and it obviously has to be solved. So that'll be great. I'll look forward to that on the dark nights. And then the other one is Belsie by L.J. Ross, which is a DCI Ryan book in her series of books, and it's a new one. And thus far, there's a body has turned up in a way that I won't give away, but it's a really good way of a body turning up, and the police have to try and work out who did it, and it takes place at their Christmas night out. So I'm really enjoying that so far. So that's the two crime that I've picked, and I'll probably get another murder mystery because even when I go through this huge TBR pile for December, you'll probably see that I don't think it's quite enough just yet. So as well as that, now I will warn you, you'll hear me flicking through the books as I go here because they are sitting beside me. So as well as that, we've got Christmas Fling by Lindsay Kelk, and that should be quite fun because Lindsay Kelk's always good fun, and that looks like a fake romance book with a family at Christmas. We also have One Day in December by Josie Silver. I started reading Josie Silver this year and I really like her books. I'm really looking forward to this one. I think at Christmas you need a Karen Swan. She does really good Christmas romances, and for anybody that hasn't read any, get one and try them because they are really good. And this year I'm going to be reading Christmas by Candlelight by Karen Swan. The next one is It's Beginning to Look a Lot Like Christmas by Hayley Dunlop, and the tagline for this book is Can She Recreate the Christmas Movie Magic? So I think that'll be quite, Love Actually, Bridget Jones, Notting Hill type of book, so that'll be really good. And then I have The Christmas Tree Farm by Laurie Gilmore, which is a Dream Harbour book. I've mentioned before I love the Dream Harbour books, and I haven't read The Christmas Tree Farm yet, and they've just released this in a beautiful hardback edition, special edition, so with lovely sprayed edges and all the bells and whistles. So I'll be reading that probably next week because that's probably towards the top of the TBR pile, and I'll be getting to that as soon as I've finished my L.J. Ross murder mystery. Then a writer that I haven't read yet is Hannah Grace, and she's got a new book out called Holiday Ever After. Now I'm going to be really honest, the thing that attracted me to this is it's got a lovely pink cover, and pink's my favourite colour and most things that I have are pink, so that's why I picked it up. And then I read it, the blurb, and I think it sounds really good. Again, it's a kind of small town, somebody's life goes wrong and they have to go back home and that kind of thing, so I think that'll be quite fun, but I shall report back. And then the last two, here in Glasgow we have a book festival called I Write. I Write is a Glaswegian phrase for those, it means yeah, okay. But they've changed it, and the name of the festival is I Write, as in WRITE. So I went to some events last week, two of which were for romantic fiction. One event was with Sophie Gravia, who I've mentioned in the podcast before, and another writer, just let me get his book. Sorry about that. And it's called Not Good Enough by James Robert Moore, and it's a contemporary queer romantic comedy, which we are going to cover in the podcast in January. I can give you a spoiler. We're going to do Not Good Enough in January for the podcast because I'm really looking forward to reading James's book. And then the other event that I went to at I Write was 2 modern romantic writers, one of whom I think I've mentioned before. Jenny Colvin was there, and I got to meet Jenny again, and it was lovely to see her again and meet her and got my book signed. And so I've got her new book, The Secret Christmas Library, and I'll keep that for Christmas week because I like a Jenny Colgan in the few days leading up to Christmas, so that'll be towards the end of the TBR pile. But then another writer that I hadn't heard of, and it was lovely to meet her and get my book signed but also hear about her book, is Anne-Marie Ryan and her new book Christmas at the Movies. And I got that and I've added that to my TBR pile, and that's about a couple who run a cinema in the Cotswolds and they have to try and save it, and you know, I'm sure we can guess what will happen, but I don't think it's quite as simple as that from what the writer said. But again, it was lovely to be at those events and meet all of those writers and get my books signed, but hear about their books, and also to discover some new writers that I'm really looking forward to reading, particularly in the romantic genre. So hopefully that should be a fun December, and that's my TBR pile. If you've got other recommendations for Christmas books, then please do get in touch at the usual socials and the email address warmfuzzybookclub@gmail.com, or on the socials at warmfuzzybookclub on Blue Sky and Instagram. So I've got my TBR pile, but I can't decide when to put up my Christmas tree. Is it too early to put up your Christmas tree? I think it kind of is still at this point. But do I want to put up my Christmas tree early and get my TBR pile started? Absolutely. But I don't know if I want to be that person. No judgment if you do. I just don't know if I want to be that person. The good news for me has been, though, as we come into November, December, the coffee shop beside my work is still doing pumpkin spice lattes. So I'm still mainlining pumpkin spice lattes. And I'm not quite ready to go into the proper Christmas drinks yet, although I've had a few eggnog lattes at a chain that I won't mention because people will shout at me, but then they do a really good eggnog latte at that mermaid based coffee shop. So yeah, we're coming into December. I'm starting to look forward to the Christmas holidays, as I'm sure other people are. If you work over Christmas and New Year, then I really respect you for doing that. I'm lucky that I do a job where we get 2 weeks off pretty much, and I'm really looking forward to the break, but mostly I'm looking forward to sitting with a massive pile of books that I know I'm getting from people. Again, if you listen to this podcast, then you're probably quite bookish, and I don't know about you, but all I ever really ask people for presents is books. So my mother-in-law and my husband and the various people in my life have been given a big pile of books to buy me, and that will be my plan between Christmas and New Year, is to just sit and work my way through that and to just take the time to do it, as well as work on this podcast probably, because as I say, we've already picked the book for January. I haven't told you the book for December yet, but now I've told you the book for January, so you know, we're getting slightly ahead of ourselves, but we'll keep going. So yeah, that's me in the lead up to Christmas. I don't really have much to say about November because I don't know about you, but I always think once kind of Halloween and, well, in the UK we've got bonfire night. I don't really like it because I don't really like fireworks, but I won't explain bonfire night to any overseas listeners. You can look it up yourself. But I think in the UK, once we've got those out of the way, it's just that lull until Christmas, really, when November's dark and usually pouring the rain. It's certainly raining today, and you know, you just want to come home from work at night and have a quick shower or a bath, put on your pajamas and just curl up with a Hallmark Christmas movie or a good book or a box set on Netflix, or you know, it's that time where we just want to hibernate. And I think that's where our cousins in the US probably have it a bit better because they have Thanksgiving to look forward to, which is this week coming, and we don't have that in the UK. Once bonfire night, which is on the 5th of November, is out of the way, we've got nothing until Christmas. So I think it's quite a dreary time, and for me that's when books become really important, is when we can start to, you know, just for use of a Scottish phrase, coorie in, which means just get cosy and just stay in the house with a nice blanket and a cup of something hot and a good book, as I say, or something to watch on the TV. And I like it for that reason. It's the same reason why I don't mind January too much, mostly, is because it is a good excuse to just sit and read a book inside and, you know, look outside. Has anybody had snow yet? We've had snow. Wee bit. Hasn't, you know, rain hugely, but we have had a bit of snow. So yes, we are coming into winter. So let me know about your TBR piles. I'll keep you updated on my TBR piles post Christmas, and yeah, I look forward to hearing what you're reading. So I think without further ado, let's move on to this month's books. Okay, so I'm going to start this month's books by saying I made a huge mistake, folks. I should never have picked 2 books to do in 1 month for this podcast, and it very, very, very likely will not happen again. Especially 2 huge books. Neither of these books is particularly short, so trying to read them wasn't a huge problem. Trying to pull together the content for the podcast, however, turned out to be quite a big job. So I think this month will be a bit of an anomaly. Now, what I can say is this month has been a huge pleasure in a lot of ways, because getting to go back and read these 2 books was brilliant. I mean, in so many ways, it was brilliant. Probably my favourite author of all time and my favourite modern author together. Getting to read both of them were great. So just to remind everybody that the books for this month were Emma by Jane Austen and Watermelon by Marian Keyes. And the reason that I picked these books for this month was that they are both kind of anniversaries. Well, for Watermelon it is actually an anniversary. It's the 30th anniversary of the publication of Watermelon, and for Jane Austen this year is the 250th anniversary of the birth of Jane Austen, so that's why I've picked that one. And it was a great pleasure to go back and read some Jane Austen, and it was an enormous pleasure to go back and read some early Marian Keyes. It's been a really fun month in that way for the podcast. However, as I say, trying to do the 2 books together turned into quite a mammoth task, so that's part of the reason I have to apologise that this episode is about a week late. It took me a lot longer to manage than I thought. I've had a busy month since our last episode, and I just gave myself a bit too much to do. I also realised it was probably a bit too much for anybody who wants to read along with the podcast, so it won't happen again. We'll be sticking to 1 book per month, and to make it more manageable for me, but also to make it more manageable for you. So to give some background as to why I picked these 2 books, as I say, it was to do with the anniversaries, and I wanted to cover both in the anniversary year, but also I just thought for me personally it would be really fun to do an Austen and a Keyes together, because as I say, they are 2 writers that mean a huge amount to me and that I absolutely love, and I just thought it'd be quite fun. Also, these books were published exactly 180 years apart. So Emma was published in 1815 and Watermelon in 1995. So I thought it would be quite fun in some ways to look at them as a piece together. You know, as I say, when you look at Jane Austen, probably in a lot of ways the mother of the romantic novel, or what we think of as the romantic comedy, and Marian Keyes, who is absolutely one of the top writers at the moment, who started as romantic comedies, but I would say her books have become less in that genre in some ways as she's developed, but I do think she still writes a cracking romantic comedy, and it's always a big thing for me when there's a new Marian Keyes, and I always really look forward to reading her books. So we're going to do it in order of seniority, and we're going to do Emma first and then Watermelon. I'm going to try and make this podcast episode not 3 hours long, so this probably won't be as in-depth a dive as the previous couple of episodes, we'll probably do a bit less on each book than perhaps we normally would. And again, that's just because I've picked two quite huge books. So there are similarities between the two books. They're both novels about a female character and her relationship to those around about her. And they are both about women's lives at the time and what women's lives looked like at the time. And it's just really funny, even going back and looking at Watermelon through a 2025 lens, there's so many things that have changed. And then obviously when we go back and look at Emma, there's so much has changed in the 210 years since that novel was published. So yeah, so to look at Emma first of all, my overall thoughts on Emma was I really enjoyed it. Again, it's been a long time since I read it, and it was probably one of the last Austen novels that I read. The first one I read was Sense and Sensibility when I was about 11, and it was at the time when the movie came out in 1995 with Emma Thompson and Kate Winslet, that fantastic movie, which I still love to this day. I always think about Greg Wise up on that horse in the rain, and yeah. And then from there I went on to Pride and Prejudice, obviously, and I was about 11 again. I remember I bought both of those books in a bookshop in Carlisle with my grandmother when we were out shopping. We were on holiday in that part of the world, and I remember seeing them, and I'd heard about the movie from somebody at school, and I thought I want to try and read that, and I really enjoyed Sense and Sensibility, and I really like it, but when I read Pride and Prejudice, I remember finding it humorous and I remember really liking it, but then I went back and read Pride and Prejudice again when I was about 16, and that was when I realised that would be my favourite book of all time, and it still is. I genuinely think Pride and Prejudice is the greatest novel of all time for me. I love it. I can genuinely probably recite most of it at this point. I've read it so often. I haven't actually read it for about a year and a bit, and I will go back and read it possibly in the new year. It's the only book really that I go back and reread regularly. We will do an episode on Pride and Prejudice probably at some point to coincide with the new Netflix TV adaptation that's coming out, I think, next year. So probably we'll do Pride and Prejudice next year when I've got time for a 5-hour episode for me to gush about how much I love it. And then when I was about 18, I read Persuasion, and that's my second favourite Austen novel after Pride and Prejudice. I think in some ways Persuasion's probably her best novel for me, and I think it's her most mature, and I think it's got, it's got everything in it, and I love Persuasion. And then I read Mansfield Park and Northanger Abbey about the same time, and I've just been an Austen devotee since then, since I was about 18. I love Austen. As I say, she's probably the writer that I've gone back and reread the most. I'm not a huge rereader, so always happy to go back and play in Austen's sandpit with her. So, if I'm being really honest, Emma, I like the story of Emma, and I weirdly quite like the character of Emma. We'll come on to that in a minute, but this is not Austen's best novel in my opinion. I know some people think it is. For me, this one's just a wee bit long-winded. I do think it sags a wee bit in the middle. I do think the middle's a wee bit of a slog to get through in some ways, and I think the plot is quite thin. I know that a lot of people think Austen's plots are thin, but I actually don't. I think they're incredibly rich. I do think the plot in this one's quite thin, and it's quite drawn out in some ways. However, that said, as I've said, this novel was a huge joy to read again, mainly because of the writing, but also it's quite a bitchy and gossipy novel, and I really enjoyed that because I think Austen does bitchy, gossipy, satire with such wit that it's just really funny. And that's what I would say about Emma, is it's such a funny book, and it's so witty and cutting in a lot of ways that it was just lovely. And the one thing about Austen is the language that's used is just gorgeous from start to finish. And weirdly, although it's one of our longest novels, it's probably one of our simplest novels, because it's essentially just a series of funny scenes in drawing rooms and then in other congregations, because that's essentially what it is. It's just Emma going through her life, meddling in other people's lives with those around her, in this small circle of people that she has around her. And there are not that many characters in this book, because it's actually very self-contained in a lot of ways. It essentially goes between, apart from a couple of scenes where they go, you know, on days out or to a ball at a local inn, it's essentially between two houses. You know, it's essentially just goes between two houses, backwards and forwards, and that's where the action takes place. So it's one of our simplest novels in some ways, but it's also quite complex in the relationships between the characters and the kind of backwards and forwards. So I think for me that's where the sparkle comes from, and it's the fact that the plot doesn't matter really. The plot is absolutely a device for that dialogue and those characters that Austen draws. You know, you can sum up the plot in about, you know, 2 sentences, which I will do in a moment. I promise I'm getting to it. So it's a book in 3 parts, and it was published in 3 volumes, so it is genuinely a novel in 3 parts. And for me, where I see the 3 parts are: part 1 is Emma, Harriet Smith and Mr. Elton. Part 2 is Emma, Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax. And then part 3 is Emma, Mr. Knightley and Harriet. And that, I think that's the kind of core plot between the 3. So, to sum up the plot of Emma Woodhouse is an incredibly rich young woman of 21 who likes to meddle in the love lives of those around about her, and who has decided that she will never marry. And it goes through her relationships with her small social circle and her father and her sister and her family, who we see momentarily, and her relationship with the family friend Mr. Knightley, who is the only person that calls Emma out on her bad behaviour, and who, you know, looks after Emma in a way that she perhaps needs at that time, would be the way that I would put it. Doesn't sound very feminist, but we are in 1815, so, you know, we have to take things where we find them. So, as I said, a lot of people don't like Emma. I actually don't mind Emma. Austen famously said, "I'm going to take a heroine no one but me will much like." And I think that's true. I think, you know, if that's her intent, then she absolutely managed it, because Emma's not massively likeable. She isn't. She's a queen bee, you know. She's rich. She's probably quite spoiled and entitled, you know. She has no mother, you know, so she can basically do what she wants, you know. The first line in the novel is, Emma Woodhouse, handsome, clever and rich, with a comfortable home and happy disposition, seemed to unite some of the best blessings of existence, and had lived nearly 21 years in the world with very little to distress or vex her. So essentially what that means is she lives a very privileged life, and she can basically do what she wants. And that's Emma, and she does do what she wants. Now, the thing about this novel that I like is it is a fantasy by Austen, because it is about a young woman of means who can do what she wants, and that wasn't Austen. Famously, Austen, after her father died, Austen didn't write for a long time because she couldn't, because the family had nowhere to live. They had no set address, and it wasn't until a member of the extended family gave her and her mother and her sister the cottage at Chawton that she actually managed to go back to writing and started writing what we know as the novels that we have today. So I think, you know, and you know, this is not a hot take, this is Austen imagining a world in which she could do whatever she wants. And the novel begins with the marriage of Emma's governess, Miss Taylor, or as her father, Mr. Woodhouse, keeps calling her, poor Miss Taylor, to a local, you know, kind of wealthy man, Mr. Weston, and that's came about because of Emma's matchmaking. So Emma thinks that she's really good at matchmaking, and she thinks that this is her new thing. And again, that just speaks to the sphere of influence for a young woman. There wasn't a lot that she could do, so she's scrabbling around looking for something to do. And again, I think that's really an interesting way to look at it, of, she is so restricted in what she can do that she has to do that. I really like her dad, Mr. Woodhouse. He's a character that's, there for comic relief. He's a hypochondriac. He's always worrying about everything. He hates any kind of change. So he's, that's why I'm saying poor Miss Taylor, and poor Mrs. Weston, as he calls her, because that goes on throughout the novel. He can never accept that her getting married is a good thing. He sees it as a terrible thing, and that, this is the worst thing that could possibly have happened to her, when in actual fact it's the worst thing that could happen to him, because it's upset the equilibrium of his household in some ways. And Mr. Knightley tries to warn Emma off against matchmaking, but Emma decides that she's going to do one more, and it's for the handsome young vicar, Mr. Elton. Now, from the very start of this novel, we get the sparring backwards and forwards between Emma and Mr. Knightley. And it really works well. There's a respect and a warmth between the two of them, but there is also this combativeness between them, where he will call her out on her bad behaviour, and she will, brush him off, and, that kind of thing. And I think it works really well, and it's really flirty from the start. Mr. Knightley is also the character that shows that Emma doesn't live in the real world. So the next thing that happens in the novel is that Emma is introduced to a young woman who lives at the local school called Harriet Smith. And the thing about Harriet Smith is no one has any idea who her parents were, and therefore she has few prospects. And when Emma meets her, it becomes apparent that she is in love with a local farmer called Robert Martin, a young farmer. And Emma is horrified at the idea of Harriet being with a farmer, and when he proposes, Emma convinces Harriet to turn him down for better prospects, and Mr. Knightley is horrified and really puts Emma in her place about this, because he understands the terribleness of what Emma's done, because he understands that Harriet Smith may not get another offer, and Emma doesn't, because Emma can only see her own short view of the world, and her own wealth and privilege, and at a time when this book was written, women were expected to accept a man when he proposed, because they were not guaranteed to get another proposal unless they were from a very rich family who could provide a large dowry, and Harriet has none of that. And Mr. Knightley knows that, so Mr. Knightley really does try and put Emma in her place regarding Harriet and Mr. Martin. And it's a really good scene, because she is chastised, as she often is, by Mr. Knightley, but she doesn't accept that she's done wrong, and she then decides that the thing to do would be to put Harriet onto Mr. Knightley and try and get her and Mr. Knightley together. Now, the issue with this matchmaking is that Harriet is, for want of a better phrase, a complete and utter ninny. She's so easily led by Emma, she's so cowed by Emma, and she's so bowled over by her that she will do whatever Emma wants, even if it goes against good sense. But to be honest, there's not really that much evidence of Harriet showing any good sense. Emma also doesn't really take into consideration the feelings of Harriet or Mr. Elton in this scenario. She just decides that they should be together and tries to engineer it. And the other issue with that is that Mr. Elton is a complete and utter tool, is the word I'm going to use. He is a tool, and we will understand why he's a tool, and we will see more of that as the novel goes on. But for me, the idea of what would have happened had Harriet ended up with Mr. Elton is worse than what Emma imagines is going to happen had, if she was married to Robert Martin, because she would have been completely out of her depth with Mr. Elton, and also I don't imagine he would have treated her that well. I mean, I know people like to write novels about Austen characters, It might be an idea for somebody at some point to write an alternative universe version where Harriet and Mr. Elton did end up together, because I don't think it would be a particularly happy novel. So once Emma convinces Harriet to refuse Mr. Martin, she then makes it her mission to get her and Mr. Elton together, and Harriet is so eager to please Emma that she goes along with it, and she convinces herself that she is also in love with Mr. Elton. And part of the thing that makes me laugh about Emma at this point is the reason why she's trying to put Harriet onto Mr. Elton is because she thinks that he's good enough for Harriet, but he's not good enough for her. Now, at this point, she's still telling herself that she won't get married, but I love that really snobby streak of, well, he's perfectly fine for you, the farmer wasn't, but the vicar is, but I won't touch him, he wouldn't be for me. And, Emma uses Harriet like she's a living doll and that she can play with, and a lot of the time that's how it feels in this novel, is that she's using those around about her and the human beings around her as living dolls. And I think that's why a lot of people don't like Emma, is she plays with people's lives, and she does so quite maliciously in some ways, and she knows what she's doing a lot of the time, and she is being manipulative of people. But again, it's about that power dynamic in 1815 when this novel was written. Women had very little power in any real way unless they were widows with money. If you were a young woman relying on your father's money and the prospect of a good marriage, and if, like Emma at the start of the novel, you don't want to get married, then you are limited as to what power you have. Whereas in this small village, living in the big house, Emma does actually have power of a social kind, and she does have power over those around her, and she doesn't wield it well, and she doesn't wield it benevolently, but it's the only way that really she can feel any power in her life. So I think, again, it's not that she's unlikable, she's just a victim of the circumstances a lot of the time, but then she doesn't make good decisions. She really doesn't make good decisions most of the time. So anyway, Mr. Elton then starts to show interest in Harriet, and this is a spoiler, but again, we go into spoilers on this podcast, so we'll just do it. What he doesn't realise is it's not Harriet that he's interested in, it is Emma, and as I've just said, Emma has decided she doesn't want him. He's not good enough for her. And then he just becomes a bit ridiculous. So, for example, Emma paints Harriet, and then he makes this big song and dance about taking the painting to London to get it framed. So again, both think that this is because it's a painting of Harriet, when in actual fact it's a painting that Emma had done. And then the two of them are composing a book of riddles, and he gives them a riddle to put in the book, and the solution to the riddle is that it's about courtship. So again, he's sending these signals, and this is where Emma's not quite as clever as she thinks she is until it's too late. At no point does she think this could be for her benefit and that she's his object. She thinks it's Harriet, and part of that is arrogance, because she thinks that the man would not be stupid enough to think that he would have a chance with her. And that's the problem, is Mr. Elton, as we find out, is also very arrogant. So when that arrogance meets hers, it becomes a conflict between the two. And she does see eventually that he is actually quite cunning and conniving and a total social climber. He wants a wife who will raise his social standing, and it all kind of comes to a head, that storyline, in a really funny scene when at Christmas time, at the Westons, on the way back, Emma has to share a carriage with him, and he tries to declare himself, and she's horrified and tells him no uncertain terms. And again, that's when she starts to see the other side of him, this person who she thought was a nice, mild-mannered, good-looking young man. She sees that he is actually, wanting to better himself and to use her to better himself. And she had an inkling before the events in the carriage, but it was too late when she realised what she thought was going on. So again, Emma is not as smart as she thinks she is, and that's what I like about it, is I don't like seeing her get her comeuppance, but I do like seeing her get to know what the world is really like and come out of her sphere. And I think that's what Austen does really well. But also, as we know from most Austen novels, she writes ridiculous characters really well, and they are really funny. And I do think Mr. Elton is really funny. And then he gets superseded by another ridiculous character, which we will talk about soon. But to kind of bring his plotline to an end in some ways, he disappears. And when he comes back with a wife who is a young woman of new money, a nouveau riche, and she is even more ridiculous than he is, and she is even more of a social climber than he is. So he recedes into the background as the novel goes on, and she comes forward, and the two of them are just reprehensible, and they have no redeeming features of them at all, and they are just really funny characters. I mean, Mrs. Elton is monstrous in a lot of ways, and really funny, and it's just that razor sharp satire, and that Austen has for these characters, and the pomposity of these characters, and she just gets them, and you know exactly who this person is, because even today we can see these kinds of characters, and they're just a joy. They are just a joy. So once we move on from the Mr. Elton debacle, we then move into the part of the novel which has to do with Frank Churchill and Jane Fairfax and Emma. So Frank Churchill we hear of long before we see him, and Jane Fairfax as well, and the anticipation builds until we finally meet them. So Frank Churchill is the son of Mr. Weston, and because his wife died, he was raised by... Just to clarify that, sorry. Because Mr. Weston's wife died, Frank was raised by his brother and his wife, I think. If I'm wrong, sorry. It's a bit hard to keep the family tree in my head. Anyway, the Churchills. So that's why he's called Churchill and not Weston. He's been raised by this couple who have money and wealth and privilege. So we hear about him, and his father doesn't see him, and they're hoping that he will come now that his father's married. And Jane Fairfax is the niece of Miss Bates and the granddaughter of Mrs. Bates, who are friends and neighbours of the Woodhouses, who Miss Bates' father was the vicar, and then when he died, the mother and the daughter have fallen on harder times financially, but they're still part of the upper set because of who they were. And Jane Fairfax is the daughter of the other Bates sister who has died. And again, Jane has been living with a family called Colonel Campbell and Mrs. Campbell, who've overseen her education. So we hear lots about these two before we get to know them, and then word reaches that Jane is coming, and Emma's not very happy about it because she doesn't like Jane. Emma and Jane have very little in common, it's decided, and Emma doesn't like her. And again, this is where the bitchy gossipy thing comes in, but also it's a two-way thing, because at the end of volume 1 of the novel, Mr. Knightley shows clear his disdain for the idea of Frank Churchill because Emma is going on about him a lot, and we see that jealousy because it's clear that Emma is very enamoured with the idea of Frank. So we're set up for these two strangers to arrive to us. They're strangers to us, and for the male, Emma is very intrigued and loves the idea of him, and for the female, she couldn't care less and she doesn't like her. So we're set up for this kind of back and forth between the two sides of the two men and the two women, and this kind of love square that goes on between them. And again, Austen draws it really well, I think. We then get into this situation where Emma tries to like Jane, but she never quite manages it. Something always goes on, and she knows she should like her because, again, Jane has been... she has little means, she's going to have to work, whereas Emma's never going to have to do that. She's grown up without her mother, well, her parents, she grew up with this family, and it turns out that the daughter of the Campbells has married a Mr. Dixon, again, another man of wealth and privilege, and Emma is convinced that Jane has had to leave the Campbells and come and stay with her aunt and her grandmother because she had a thing with Mr. Dixon. And she's absolutely convinced of this. So again, we get this back and forth between them of Emma trying to like her and then deciding she can't like her, and then despite her better nature, trying to do it again and backwards and forwards. And it's really funny because she really does tie herself up in knots at points trying to like Jane. And I suppose the thing for me is there's no reason not to like Jane Fairfax. There's nothing really to not like about her. She's quiet, she's good at music, she's polite, she's just not vivacious, I think, as Emma would possibly want her. I mean, I hate the phrase plain Jane, but I suppose in some ways that is what she is. She's quite quiet. Well, we then see that still rivers run deep later in the novel, but Jane Fairfax is just she's a good character, and she's just trying to get through life as best she can. Mr. Knightley again is checking Emma about her feelings about Jane Fairfax because he sees that they're unfair, and he also sees again that Emma is being unfair to her given her social status and Jane's, and he thinks that she could be kinder to Jane. And I have to agree, I do think she is quite unkind to Jane Fairfax in a lot of ways, but it does make it funny. It is a novel, these are not real people, and it is funny to watch Emma being quite so, harsh about Jane Fairfax, because it is funny, and it is quite bitchy in a lot of ways, and I do love a bitchy line in a novel. And then, when word comes back that Mr. Elton is getting married and has found a wife, Austen comes out with, I think, just an amazing line, and the line is, "Human nature is so well disposed towards those who are in an interesting situation that a young person who either marries or dies is sure of being kindly spoken of." How can you not love a writer that comes up with lines like that? It's so funny. It's so witty. And again, it just sets up that thing of, because he's got married, everybody's really, happy and that kind of thing. And it just really makes me laugh, that line, and I love it. So, as well as this, Frank Churchill finally arrives and Emma is immediately very taken with him. Now, not to talk about adaptations because there are multiple of these. In the most recent version of Emma that was filmed in 2020 with Anya Taylor-Joy, Frank Churchill is played by Callum Turner, and I think it was a perfect piece of casting because that's pretty much how I imagine Frank Turner to look. I don't like Mr. Knightley in that film, no offence to Johnny Flynn, but not my Mr. Knightley, but I do think Callum Turner is perfectly cast as Frank Churchill. Anyway, Emma is very taken with him in the start, and she thinks that she could take up with him and that he could be, the man for her. So things become very flirtatious and not quite proper because she has quite a lot of open chats with him, particularly about Jane Fairfax, and he gets her to say things that she shouldn't, and she really does let her guard down too much. And again, Mr. Knightley sees this and tries to warn her a little bit, but she just doesn't see it. And Frank, I think because it's an Austen novel, we can see immediately that Frank is another Mr. Wickham, Mr. Willoughby, Mr. Tilney. He is. There's always a man that will complicate things. A Henry Crawford, and that will be a bit of a shit, and he is a bit of a shit in some ways. And a really funny moment in the book is that her good opinion is actually shaken because he goes to London to get his hair cut and then comes back, and she just thinks this is a ridiculous thing to do and she can't understand why he would do it. And it actually does make her rethink things with Frank a little bit because she thinks, well, is he just a bit of a dandy and, is he not to be trusted? So yeah. I like that scene, and I think that makes me really laugh. And then we get to see a bit more of Emma's snobbishness because a local couple called the Coles decide to hold a dinner. Now, the Coles were lower class and have recently become much more rich and are the second family in the village behind the Woodhouses, and they invite everyone to dinner, including Emma, and Emma is not happy at the invitation because she thinks that this is beneath her and why would she go. And then she hears that Mr. Knightley and a few of their social circle are going, and suddenly changes her mind, and it actually turns out she has a great night and she absolutely condescends to go. And this is one of my favourite moments in the book, is when she arrives at the dinner at the Coles, she gets out of the carriage and Mr. Knightley's just around, and they have a very flirtatious moment together just before they go into this dinner, and it's a lovely moment and I love it, and it's just so good, and you can feel things heating up between them, you know, even though she's completely unaware of it at this point. You can absolutely feel things starting to heat up between them, and it's really well written, and I do think that's one of this novel's big selling points for me, is that slow burn between Emma and Mr. Knightley, because the anticipation does ramp up. Austen is very good at writing a slow burn romance, and even a romance that neither of them or even one of them is not aware of, and she does this really well in Emma, and she does it really playfully, and I really like it. So at the dinner, she gets to spend more time with Frank Churchill, and he is absolutely her, you know, her person of interest, and it seems that he feels the same way, and she, you know, really likes that he's showing her this attention. So we actually think that she could end up with Frank Churchill, or should I say, she thinks she may end up with Frank Churchill. I think we know the truth of what's going on here. And then it's decided that because Frank's here, the Westons will hold a ball in the local inn, but Frank then has to leave suddenly, so it's cancelled. And Emma's really upset and heartbroken that Frank has had to leave to go back to Mrs. Churchill, who's very demanding of his time and doesn't like him to be away and wants to keep him to herself. And that's the end of volume 2. So where we're up to is we've had Emma kind of give up her matchmaking in some ways, but not really, because we know what will happen. She will try again. We can see that Mr. Knightley is in love with Emma. We can see that Emma is in love with Mr. Knightley, but she doesn't realise it. And we can see that, you know, the pieces are moving together at this point in the novel. And then as we move into the third volume, we're just waiting to see how Austen beautifully brings this together. So again, when we get to meet Mrs. Elton, she is a ridiculous character. She's overbearing, she's pushy, she's gauche, she's vulgar in a lot of ways, and Emma just hates her on sight. Like, Emma just does not like her at all, and to be honest, neither do we, but she is funny. Like, she's just really funny and really quite ridiculous in a lot of ways, and it's brilliant. So when Frank Churchill returns, the ball goes ahead, and this is a big turning point in the novel, although we don't know it yet, which is at the ball, Mr. Elton is pushed towards inviting Harriet Smith to dance, and Harriet is on the side like a wallflower, and Mr. Elton refuses to dance with her, and humiliates her in front of everyone. So Mr. Knightley gets her up to dance. And we also, again, we get another nice moment between Mr. Knightley and Emma, and we get to see how much he actually admires her, and that their friendship is deep, and, you know, that they know each other really well, and also how much he thinks of her, and that he is just calling her out on bad behaviour because he cares, and he wants her to, you know, be the best that he can be. And, you know, it's not that he's trying to change her, he's just trying to, you know, make her be the best version of herself that she can be, because I think he sees that a lot of the time, because she's bored, and this might just be me putting my interpretation on it, I think because he can see that she's probably bored, he sees that she gets into trouble, so he's trying to, you know, push her towards the better path in some ways. Not that she needs him to, but I think, you know, he does see that, you know, he does see the positives in her, and that they much outweigh the negatives, but the sharper edges need softening in a lot of ways, and I think that's probably what he thinks as well. Again, we get another scene where Frank and Emma have a conversation, and Emma gives her opinion about Jane Fairfax to Frank, which is a mistake. Keep that comment in your head because it's going to come back. We'll put a pin in that comment and we'll come back to it. And the ball is also where we see how in love with Frank Emma actually is, and that she really is in danger of getting her heart broken, because again, as a reader, we know he's a wrong, and we know that this is not going to end well for her. And it's heartbreaking in some ways to get to this point when you realise how much she likes him, because we know it's not going to end well for her. However, we also know that this is a Jane Austen novel, so therefore all will be a happy ending, and that Emma will get the marriage that she deserves, not the one that she initially wants, as happens in all of the novels. We also really get to see that Mr. Knightley does not like Frank at all, and he picks up that there is something going on with Frank and Jane, and that Emma is in danger of getting her heart broken, so again, he knows that. We then get quite a lengthy sequence, which it's not my favourite bit of the book, and they go to Donwell Abbey for the day, a big group of them, which is Mr. Knightley's house, and Mr. Knightley does everything that he can to get Mr. Woodhouse and Emma to come as well. He makes Mr. Woodhouse really comfortable, gets him indoors out of the way where everybody else can be outdoors, and, you know, gets him lots of things that he can look at, and, you know, to keep him occupied. And that's a portent for the future of the novel. So again, we'll put a pin in that one as well, and we'll come back to that at the end. But again, Mr. Knightley showing that Mr. Woodhouse's comfort and happiness are important to him are going to be really important in this novel in the next few chapters. And then during that visit, Jane leaves suddenly, and then Frank shows up later, and Emma's surprised that he's made it. And again, she thinks that there's something going on with Jane Fairfax that we don't know. Oh, one thing I should have mentioned as well. There is a pianoforte which is delivered to the Bates house for Jane Fairfax with no idea who it's from, and everybody assumes it's from the Campbells. But, spoiler alert, it's actually from Frank Churchill. So we'll come on to that in a minute again. But, so I may as well let the cat out of the bag. Pretty soon we're going to learn that Frank and Jane are engaged and have been engaged for a while, and that he had no interest in Emma at all, and has basically been playing Emma to keep their secret so that it's not released. The reason for that is that he can't marry because he doesn't have enough money yet, and what happens is that Mrs. Churchill dies, and then almost immediately it's announced that Frank and Jane are engaged, and that they have been. Before that, to just skip back a little bit, we have a gorgeous scene with Mr. Knightley and Emma when they make up, and he kisses her hand. And just let me find the bit in the book. And again, Austen says, he took her hands, whereby she had not herself made the first motion. She could not say she might perhaps have rather offered it, but he took her hand, pressed it, and certainly was on the point of carrying it to his lips, when from some fancy or not, he suddenly let it go. I love that line. So again, we're getting towards the end of the novel, and we can see that things are ramping up here. And we can see that there is something between the two of them. So then Emma finds out that Frank Churchill is engaged to Jane Fairfax, and at this point she's been trying to push Harriet towards Frank because she thinks they would be a good match. And she goes to see Harriet to tell him about Jane and Frank, and Harriet is quite changed by this point. She has become quite arrogant, and she's become quite self-assured, and she's no longer as much of a ninny in some ways. And she tells Emma that actually it's Mr. Knightley that she loves, and that it's Mr. Knightley that she, wants to marry. And Emma again is horrified because she realises that she loves Mr. Knightley and that he's the only man that she could marry. And again, Austen sums this up beautifully at this point in the novel, when she says, Emma's eyes were instantly withdrawn and she sat silently meditating in a fixed attitude for a few moments. A few minutes were sufficient for making her acquainted with her own heart. A mind like hers, once opening to suspicion, made rapid progress. She touched, she admitted, she acknowledged the whole truth. Why was it so much worse that Harriet should be in love with Mr. Knightley than with Frank Churchill? Why was the evil so dreadfully increased by Harriet's having some hope of a return? It darted through her with the speed of an arrow that Mr. Knightley must marry no one but herself. Again, how can you not love lines like that? Like, it's just, that moment of self-realisation, it's better than just saying Emma realised she loved Mr. Knightley and she wanted to marry him. It's just the language that you get with Austen, and I love it. Emma, again, completely misunderstands, because Emma's a bit of a ninny herself in some ways, and she thinks that Mr. Knightley's in love with Harriet as well because they dance together, and she thinks that Mr. Knightley's going to throw in his social position and everything else and marry Harriet, and she just goes into a total state of depression. And she just, in one last conniving moment, decides that she has to get rid of Harriet for a while, so she contrives to send her to London to her sister's to get some dental work done, and her sister agrees to take her, so she gets Harriet away from Mr. Knightley. And then not long after she gets rid of Harriet out of the picture, Mr. Knightley comes to see her and he declares his love. And I'm just going to read that bit out to you, if that's okay. So, I cannot make speeches, Emma, he soon resumed, and in a tone of such sincere, decided, intelligible tenderness as was tolerably convincing. If I loved you less, I might be able to talk about it more, but you know what I am. You hear nothing but truth from me. I have blamed you and lectured you, and you have borne it as no other woman in England would have borne it. Bear with the truths I would tell you now, dearest Emma, as well as you have borne with them. The manner perhaps may have as little to recommend them. God knows I have been a very indifferent lover, but you understand me. Yes, you see, you understand my feelings, and will return them if you can. At present I ask only to hear once you hear your voice. So, Emma's delighted about this and tells him that she loves him too, and then immediately starts to worry about how she's going to tell her father, because her father, as we know, does not like to have his life upset in any way, and she worries that how she's going to tell Harriet as well. However, she gets out of that difficulty because Harriet meets Mr. Martin again in London, and they actually get engaged, and then they get married at the end of the book. And where that storyline finishes is Emma acknowledging that they will be acquainted now rather than friends due to Harriet's situation in life. So again, that snobbery does continue, and that social class thing does continue, which is, now that she's a farmer's wife, Emma and her can no longer be the friends that they once were. So that's Harriet done, and we can move on from Harriet because she's not my favourite character. So to move on from that, Mr. Knightley comes up with a plan for how they can get married, which is he will leave Donwell Abbey and he will live at Hartfield with Emma and Mr. Woodhouse until Mr. Woodhouse pegs it, and then they can move to Donwell Abbey. And Emma likes the idea, but it's also about how they're going to sell it. So they're trying to think about that. And then at that point, something happens which rarely happens in an Austen novel, which is the cad gets a chance to explain himself to, in a way. Frank Churchill writes a letter to Mrs. Weston explaining about his situation with Jane Fairfax and how he's treated Emma and how sorry he is for everything and why it all took place and everything. And that doesn't happen very often. It doesn't happen with Willoughby. It doesn't really happen with Mr. Wickham. He gets an opportunity, but not really. They're cads until the end, whereas Frank isn't really a cad. He's just a young man in a difficult situation. And again, I think that's why this is possibly a softer novel than a lot of Austen in some ways, because he does get a chance to redeem himself a little bit and explain himself. And then Jane and Frank marry because it is a lot of Austen that as many people as possible must get a happy ending. The Westons also have a baby, which is lovely. Again, everybody gets their happy ending. And then the novel ends with Emma and Mr. Knightley finally getting married through a contrivance which I think is genius and hilarious and a really good way to end a comic novel, which is Mr. Woodhouse is not happy at the idea until Mrs. Weston's poultry house is robbed, and he decides that it's actually better to have a young man around the house so that they can get married, so that he will have protection against robbers. And I think that's a really funny way to end the novel, and that's the end of the novel itself. That is the end of Emma. And again, to sum it up, this is not my favourite of Austen's novels, but my goodness, it's brilliant. Like, it is so funny, and it's so well written, and the characters are so good. And I forgot to talk about the big turning point for Mr. Knightley and Emma. Sorry, totally forgot. Is when they go to Box Hill for a day out. Emma insults Miss Bates in front of everyone, and it's horrible. I hate that scene. I hate it when it's in the movies or the TV. I hate it in the book. I just hate it. It's horrible, and it's awkward, and it's icky, and she just goes too far, and Mr. Knightley absolutely gives it to her with both barrels about this, and he's disgusted that she did this, and she does go and makes amends for it, and she doesn't like it how she did it, and that's one of the turning points, is when she does make an amends, he sees that she is changing. But yeah, that's probably why I didn't mention it beforehand, because it's just, I hate that scene. It just makes me so uncomfortable because it's so horrible. Anyway, to come back to my summation of this book, I think it is one of the good works of a great genius. It is probably still lower end Austen for me, if I'm honest. I can see that it has a lot of good about it. It's too long for me, and I genuinely don't think it sustains the pacing of well, and I don't think there's enough plot to justify the length, and it does sag for me in the middle. That volume 2 with the ball and everything, it does sag for me in some ways, but what I think makes up for it is the language and the wit and the characters. And I do like Emma as a character. I do like the fact that she's not punished for anything. She's not punished for being who she is. She just has to learn to grow up. It's a bit like Bridget Jones, as everybody knows, is a modern take on Pride and Prejudice, but I also think there's quite a bit of Emma Woodhouse and Bridget Jones, that idea of she just needs to grow up a little bit, and she needs to become more comfortable with herself and to accept life the way it is, and to accept those around her the way that they are and how she goes through life. I do think there's parallels with Bridget Jones there, and I like Emma, and I do think one of the really big selling point of this novel is Mr. Knightley. I think Mr. Knightley's a fantastic hero, romantic hero, and I think he's a great character and a man of integrity, and the good looking Frank Churchill, and Jane Fairfax is a really good character. And as I say, I don't particularly like Harriet, but you're not supposed to particularly like Harriet. She's just a bit of an idiot really in some ways, but a harmless one until she's not harmless, and again, that's Emma's influence that does that. So if you haven't read it, I would thoroughly recommend it, and if you have read it but haven't read it in a while, I would say it's worth going back to. There is also a really good narration, which I dipped into a wee bit in that middle section, I'll be honest, narrated by Jenny Agutter, which is on Audible, and it's really worth your time if you listen to that one. As I say, Jenny Aguter's a really good narrator. And there's also another version on Audible with Juliet Stevenson, the queen of the audiobook, and again, it's really good. Actually, I think I've listened to both of those now, so maybe I do like this novel more than I think. Maybe I just don't think I do. I don't know. Maybe I've got a complicated relationship with Emma. Who would have thought I would have a complicated relationship with Emma? But apparently maybe I do. Anyway, listen to it, read it, see what you think. And yeah, so that's Emma. And now on to our second book of the podcast, Watermelon by Marian Keyes. So, as I mentioned already, Watermelon was published in 1995, and it was Marian Keyes' first novel. This is the book where it all started. I first read this book when I was 15, and I was going on holiday to Mallorca with my family, and I remember reading it in Glasgow Prestwick Airport, and the flight was delayed, and I had finished the book by the time we left the airport. And I'll never forget reading this book for the first time because I just thought it was brilliant, and I stand by that. I think this book is brilliant. I just think it is just brilliant from start to finish. It was such a delight to go back and read this book after quite a few years since I last read it. It's just so funny and so heartwarming and so witty, and it's just brilliant. Like, it is just brilliant. Now, I think I've told you this earlier in the podcast. When I got to doing Marian Keyes, I was gonna gush, and this is going to be a wee bit of a gushy bit of this episode because I just love Marian Keyes. I will do an episode probably on Marian Keyes herself, you know, and my relationship with her books at some point down the line, so I'll keep a lot of this for them. But I just soak up every bit of writing that she does, and I can't actually put into words how much the books that she writes mean to me, like, and how much I love her. She is my favourite modern writer, and that's why she's in an episode with Jane Austen, because for me that is where she is in the pantheon of literature. I just love her, and I just love her books so much, and whenever I hear there's a new one coming out, it's like Christmas. It's like Christmas for me when there's a new Marian Keyes, and I will go out and get it as soon as I can, come back, start reading it, and I won't move. Again, I'll probably cover this at some point in the podcast, but I remember buying Is There Anybody Out There? The first one about Anna Walsh, and I got home and I sat up until about 5 o'clock the next morning reading it because I just couldn't stop. I honestly, I love her books, and yeah, so that's enough of the gushing for now. So on to Watermelon. So the thing that I loved about this book was, apart from all the things I've read, it was really funny to go back in time to 1995 and how different the world was. So things like they used payphones because everybody didn't have a mobile phone, and you know, like, that's what modern writers try and do is take their characters out of scenarios where they've got mobile phones all the time, because mobile phones kill plots. You know, they didn't have that back then, but what they did have to do is work out how they were going to go to a payphone and phone somebody and what the logistics of that meant. So, you know, it's really funny. And the other thing that made me laugh is, and I'll talk about this scene more, is the fact that something like pasta pesto would seem like the most exotic thing to cook. I mean, that's something that nowadays we eat on a daily basis. You know, like that's just a normal Monday night dinner. And the fact that, you know, that's exotic really made me laugh. And just to go back to that time, you know, when the world was different, and, you know, when I was a child, I mean, in 1995 I was 9. You know, yes, I am. I'm 40 next year. Let's move on. But it was a lovely to go back in that time capsule, but also it was to realise how much hasn't changed as well in terms of this book. You know, a lot of the themes are still the same, and, you know, it has aged really well. There are a few lines that I'm sure Marian Keyes wouldn't write again or wouldn't put in a book anymore, but it's not full of them. There are just a couple of bits where you're a bit like, oh, we wouldn't do that now. But it's aged beautifully because the plot and the characters and the language are so good that I'm so glad I picked this for the podcast, because I just couldn't enjoy reading it more. I couldn't enjoy reading it more. the book begins with an amazingly good line, which is, February the 15th is a very special day for me. It is the day I gave birth to my first child. It is also the day my husband left me. As he was present at the birth, I can only assume the two events were entirely unrelated. I knew I should have followed my instincts. I subscribed to the classical, or you might say the traditional role fathers play in the birth of their children, which goes as follows. Lock them in a corridor outside the delivery room, allow them admittance at no time, give them 40 cigarettes and a lighter, instruct them to pace to the end of the corridor. When they reach this happy position, instruct them to turn around and return to whence they came. Repeat as necessary. Conversation should be curtailed. They are allowed to exchange a few words with any other prospective fathers pacing along outside them. And again, that just sets it up perfectly, so we know exactly what's happening is she's had her baby and her husband's left her. And I just think it's just so witty the way that she put it as well, when we're comparing it to Austen, Austen writes a great first line as well. So, the plot of the novel is Claire's husband James leaves her on the day she gives birth to her child, and she then goes back to her family in Ireland, where she then meets Adam, who is a friend / prospective boyfriend of her sister Helen, and Claire then starts to rebuild her life and to think about potentially dating someone, Adam, again, when life decides to intervene and she realises she has a choice whether to return to her old life or continue on the new path to the life that she is building for herself. And that's the plot of the novel. So, as I said, we begin that James leaves her on the day she gives birth to her baby. I'm just going to put this out there right now. James is an absolute shit, and we'll come on later on to how much of a shit he actually is, but he is an absolute wanker from start to finish, and he's horrible. So she goes back to her family in Ireland, and she decides that, like Scarlett O'Hara, she's going to go back home. And again, to quote the book, I'm like Scarlett O'Hara. In the last few lines of Gone with the Wind, I said plaintively, I'll go home to Dublin. Yes, I agree with you. Dublin doesn't have quite the same ring to it as Tara, but what would be the point of me going home to Tara? I knew no one there. In fact, I had only ever passed through it about twice on my way to Drogheda. I apologise for my Irish pronunciation before we go any further with this book. Again, love the lines. It's just funny, it's just really funny from start to finish. So, this is the first of the Walsh Sisters books, as well as being Marian's first book. This is the first of the Walsh Sisters books, and if anybody knows Marian, then they'll know the Walsh Sisters. We've now had at least one book about every Walsh sister, and for those of us that read the book, they probably feel like family. However, we don't meet them all in this book. We meet Helen and we meet Anna, and then of course we meet the famous Mammy and Daddy Walsh, and they're just lovely characters. What I would say is the characters of Mammy and Daddy are well drawn, but they're not what they would become. Mammy is just a typical mother in some ways. She is not as quite as madcap as she would become later in the books, but she's still really funny. And Daddy is there from the start, and when we meet them, they're just a seemingly ordinary family, but they are a bit mad from the start. And one of the other things that I really like about this book is how feminist the family is, because what we find out is Mammy Walsh doesn't cook because she's a terrible cook and the family hated her cooking, so the freezer is full of microwave meals and everybody just goes and helps themselves when they want something to eat. But also, she doesn't really do any housework that much. Daddy does all the hoovering, and there's that thing about Mammy having a secret smile of a woman whose husband had done all the hoovering for the past 15 years. So they are not your typical Irish family in a lot of ways, and I think that's why we like them, is because they seem like everybody's family, but they're also, a bit different from everybody else's family in a lot of ways. Particularly in 1995, a lot of families would have still been that patriarchal society. I know I grew up in that kind of household where, my mum did the majority of the housework and, the cooking and all that kind of stuff. So in 1995, that idea was still quite revolutionary in a lot of ways, despite second wave feminism.
So she goes back to the family home in Ireland with the baby, and she sinks into a depression, um, and she starts to drink. She stops washing. She struggles to take care of the baby. Mammy has to help take care of the baby. And again, for what could be quite a depressing part of the book, is actually really funny. And it's because even when she's depressed, Keyes never lets Claire lose her spirit. She keeps her spirit, she keeps her wit. She keeps going because she realises that she has to keep going. She doesn't have a choice, and that's what I love about Claire in this, because she doesn't stop. Even at the moments of self-doubt, she'll keep going, and she gets it that there's a baby there, and she eventually does realise that she needs to look after the baby, and she gets her act together. But even at her worst moments, she is a joy to be with. The other thing that makes this part of the book really great is when we finally get to see the sisters. So when we meet Helen is a fan favourite of a lot of fans, and I know she is, and I really like Helen because, particularly in the earlier books, she's just hilarious. Like, she just doesn't care. She's just a bulldozer. She does what she wants. She's impulsive. She just does what she feels like, and she says what she feels like. She has no filter at all, and she's not malicious or horrible. She's just Helen, and she's just straightforward. And the sisters kind of make out that she's evil, but she's not. She's hilarious. Like, from the very off. I mean, Helen is hilarious from the start, and she walks in, and she's at college, and she's just brilliant in every way, and I love Helen. And I think in the later novels, when Helen and Mammy become that kind of double act of getting into scrapes and getting up to hijinks, I just think it's hilarious. So as I say, she kind of goes into this depression, and again, the conversational tone of the writing really helps with this area, because when she's in the depression, the fact that it's a first person narrative and Claire's just talking to you, like, for example, when she's talking about wearing Mammy Keyes' night dress because she doesn't have a night dress, it's those kind of things that really keep you in the novel and keep it light and keep it funny but emotional, because I think that's what's key to this novel. Is it is funny and it is a comedy, but there is genuine emotion and heartbreak, and you care. It's not that any of that gets lost in the comedy, and that's a really delicate balancing act, and I think that's something that has kept Keyes really steadfast throughout her book, her career, is that she balances comedy and drama beautifully. I mean, the example that I always think of with that is This Charming Man, which deals with some really heavy issues, but has some real laugh out loud moments in it, like hilarious moments in it, but really hard moments as well. And I think even from the start, that balance of the two is in this book, and it's just a joy. It's just a joy. There's no other way I can put it. So Claire then starts to go through the stages of grief. So, as I say, we've got the not washing and the drinking, and then she goes through what she calls the Great Terror, which is her anger, and she's just a horror in the house. Like, she's just terrorising everybody in the house. And there is a hilarious scene, which is one of my favourite scenes in the book, which is when she wants Helen to go to the off licence for her, and Helen requires payment, and she bullies Anna into giving Helen money to go to the off licence, and it's so well written, and it's so funny, and I just love that scene. To talk a wee bit about Anna's the kind of airy fairy sister who believes in spirituality and all that kind of stuff, and takes drugs and drinks a lot, and dresses like a hippie, and that kind of thing, and she's just lovely. She's always, she is just lovely, and you kind of think a lot of the time, poor Anna, And then she gets a pep talk from her daddy to bring her out of her depression, and she realises that she has to take care of this baby, and she needs to get a grip, and she needs to sort her life out, and she needs to try and talk to her husband about what's going to happen. And so she starts trying to put her life together. And she does it really well. Again, that's the thing, is there's nothing about this book that seems, kind of out of the ordinary. It's, she gives time to get through the stages of grief and get to the point where she can, pick herself up. And I think the pacing of this novel, unlike the previous book that we've spoke about in this episode, works really well. And I really like it. And I think it's, it's beautifully paced. It is beautifully paced. I also think that one of its key strengths is that the peripheral characters get their moments to add to the richness of the world that she's building. So there's, the bits involving the family. So again, there's a scene where a taxi driver turns up half in the middle of the night with a shoe, and it turns out it's Anna's shoe, and Daddy has to go and get it, and he's having a fit. There's a scene where Helen comes running into Claire's room and asks if the baby monitor's on, and then it turns out she's pretending to be a voice from the spirit world to annoy Anna, and then Anna believes it, and it turns out that she's doing it she starts doing it to the whole family. And I just think that's really funny. Again, it really made me laugh. And the scene when the scene when Claire can hear Mammy and Helen having a fight in the bathroom, and Helen's having a panic because she'd found a lump on her breast, and then we hear Mammy going, "Helen, that's not a lump on your breast, that is your breast." And then she's going up the corridor going, "I'll kill her," making me panic like that. And they're so good characters. And then when we come to the first big scene of the novel for me is when we meet Adam. So we're going to talk about Adam, and we're going to give a wee bit of time to talking about Adam. In the pantheon of gorgeous men that Marian Keyes has created, Adam is and always will be my favourite. I loved it when he turned up in her new book, My Favourite Mistake, when him and Claire came back for that one. Sorry, I had to turn around there to double check the title there because my mind went a wee bit blank. Sorry if I disappeared. I know that amongst the fans, Luke Costello from Rachel's Holiday, and again, Rachel is most people's favourites. I like Luke. I think Luke's great. I'm Team Adam. I love Adam. I've always loved Adam since I first read him on the page. He is big, tall, broad, muscular, gorgeous hair, blue eyes. He's just described as the whole package, and as well as that, he's a nice guy. He's a lovely guy, and I just think, I've read a lot of these books, as we've done a few of these books on this podcast now, and I think it's hard sometimes to get them to stand out. And I think, you can take the cookie cutter to the men in these books a lot of the time. Or should I say not the men, the object of affection can become a bit cookie cutter, not to gender it in any way. But I do think Adam stands out. I think he's just lush. That's all that I can use to describe him on the page. He's just lush. I think he's a great creation, and I think she wrote a cracking man for somebody to fall in love with, and you can understand why Claire does fall for him in this book. He's just the total package. And I do think for me he stands at the top of all of the men that Marian Keyes has created, and probably always will, unless she comes up with an absolute cracker. So don't at me if you're Team Luke. I respect you if you're Team Luke. I'm just Team Adam. That probably tells you more about my taste in men than it tells you about anything else. That long-haired, leather trouser wearing Luke goes beneath handsome, broad, muscular Adam. But yeah, that's my choice, and I'm sticking to it, and I'm happy with my choice. I'll stick with Adam. Thank you very much. The rest of you can have a look. And from the minute we meet Adam, Claire is besotted by him because he is beautiful and he's also nice. But also, at this point, Claire has decided to make the family dinner because she's feeling better. So she goes to the supermarket and gets all the ingredients in to make them pasta pesto because she thinks it would be good for them to, eat something nice for a change. And again, in a hilarious scene, Adam stays for dinner and he's the only one that actually eats the pasta pesto with any enthusiasm. And the rest of the family don't eat it, apart from Mammy, who eats it, but eats it like a martyr, as if it's, a trial that she has to go through. And Daddy and Helen refuse to eat it, and Claire's disgusted. And again, it was just that thing about, it's really funny that in 1995, pasta pesto was so modern and exotic because, as I've already said, that's a Tuesday night dinner for us these days. So when Claire then starts to pull things together for herself, we get another brilliant line, which is, "The following day dawned bright and cold and blustery. I know this because I was awake at dawn. It was a typical March day. The rain had finally stopped, but there's absolutely no symbolism in this fact. Let's face it, the bloody rain had to stop sometime." Again, how could you not love a book with lines like that? It is so funny. And I think, again, it's good to see Claire then coming through that journey of getting her life back together. She puts off contacting James again because she just can't face it. And I love the line that she says, about how, she'll tell people you have to grasp the nettle and, maybe one day I'll take my own advice. And we find out more about her relationship with James and that he was the responsible one in the relationship in a lot of ways. And we find out that, she was arrested once for being drunk and disorderly and he had to come and bail her out, and that the two of them found it really funny. And again, put a pin in that and we'll come back to it, because that fact that, she felt like he was the responsible one and the boring one in the relationship will, is a pertinent point for later in the book. When she does try to contact James, he isn't there. And she tries to contact him a couple of times and she can't get him. So, as she's getting her life back together, she decides to go to the pub with her friend Laura, who it turns out is having sex with a 19-year-old. Again, this is about 1995, the way that they talk about this. They talk about her being a paedophile and a sex offender, and there's jokes about that, Again, probably something we wouldn't do these days, but it is in the book. And, they're talking about, her sleeping with a 19-year-old art student. It's funny and it's well done. However, she then meets Adam in the pub, and he abandons his friends to come and talk to her, and at the end she gives him a lift home. Now again, when we're talking about the 90s, you can tell this book's in the 90s because she drives him home after at least 2 glasses of wine. So we've got drink driving in this book, which is interesting because again, we would not have that today. And a really funny scene at this point is when he takes her into his flat for a cup of tea and they get caught in the rain and they get soaked, and he hands her a towel and she says, no, he didn't try and dry my hair for me. This is not that kind of book. It's not a Mills and Boon book. And again, that's really funny. And those of us that know Marian Keyes know she does love a Mills and Boon book. So, I think that's a nod and a wink in some ways. And then he arranges to take her to the gym the next day, and this is when things start to get a wee bit up and down with the two of them, because she says yes to meeting him, but then she panics, and then she hurts his feelings because she's starting to panic, and then they go to the gym, and he just ignores her because she's made him feel like he's trying it on. But then they go to the cafe afterwards and they talk about things and they get to know each other really well, and again, he's so understanding and he's so nice. And, he just wants to, get to know her a bit and, see her, and he tells her that, and he's really upfront. And I think that's one of the things that I like about the relationship is he's quite upfront and she's quite withdrawn. So again, it's playing with that trope of the woman putting herself out there and the man being quite withdrawn. In actual fact, in this book, it's the man putting himself out there and the woman being quite withdrawn. Obviously, you would be withdrawn if you were clear on what you had gone through. But again, it's good to see that happening. So the next day she goes shopping and meets Adam for a coffee, and again this is another up and down scene because he's lovely to her and he's away getting coffees and they're having a good time, and then some young women from college turn up and start talking to Adam, and Claire gets freaked out and basically grabs the baby off him and like tries to do a runner, and he goes after her, and he tries to say what's wrong, and she tries to say that they shouldn't see each other, and he's quite upfront about it and says that he wants to see her and that he likes her and that kind of thing. And again, you would be like that, and that's why I like this, because it's quite, the emotions are quite true to life in this way, and you wouldn't just jump in with somebody else. And it turns out he's about 6 years younger, so again she would have these questions about why he's involved. And in a lot of ways he's much more mature than she is, and I think she realises that, but yeah. And then the other thing is she's worried that she's nicking Helen's boyfriend, because she's got in her head that he's Helen's boyfriend and that Helen's going to murder her if she steals her boyfriend. But we know the truth, which is that these two are going to end up together at the end of the book. And then we get one of my favourite scenes in the book, which is the three sisters end up in Helen's room eating bars of chocolate and just hanging out together and bickering, and it's a beautifully drawn scene, and I absolutely love that scene, and I think that is the book's strength. As I've said, the book's strength is not, for me, is not just the romantic comedy element, it is that family element, it is that relationship that is drawn so beautifully, and they're just there on the page from the first book. They are just there on the page, and that is so difficult to do, particularly with the first novel. Like, it's just, she came out of the starting gate and just has not stopped since in 30 years. So, honestly, it was great going back and reading this again. It was just great going back and reading this and seeing that it was all there from the start. And then she does a wee bit of stalking, and she goes back to the cafe in the hopes of seeing Adam again, and then he does turn up, and then he goes to get coffee, and then she thinks he's done a runner, and then she tries to get up and leave, and then he comes after her again, and the guy's trying to give her space, but you can tell he's a wee bit frustrated at the same time, because she's making him feel like a bit of a dick, and he's not. And they do have a good conversation about why she's acting like this, and again that's when we see that in emotional terms he is much more mature than she is, and I think he realises that as well, and he's willing to give her that space, but he asks her to come to his house for dinner and she agrees. And then we get a brilliant scene of her getting ready for the date. So let me just find it in the book, because I would like to just mention it here now. Let me find it. So, the preparations for Sunday. Ingredients: 1 neglected, rejected, dejected 29-year-old woman who had recently given birth, a generous helping of guilt, a pinch of anticipation, a packet of insecurity about the appearance of her body, a sprig of excitement, brackets wild if possible, a spoonful of condensed deep despair, a minor stretch marks panic, 2 black hold-up lace-top stockings, 1 interesting pair of black knickers, 1 black bra of the miraculous rather than just the plain wondrous variety, 1 bottle of red wine, 1 dress, 1 pair of shoes, decoration, whole red lipstick, several layers of dark mascara. Directions: put the stockings, knickers and bra to one side for use later. Take the woman, check her eyes and her skin to make sure that she hasn't gone past her sell-by date. Add the guilt, anticipation, insecurity, excitement, despair and panic. Mix thoroughly. Leave to stew for a couple of days. In a medium-sized bathroom, prepare the woman by shaving her legs, colouring her hair and painting her toenails. About an hour before commencing, baste generously in expensive body lotion turning frequently. Add the stockings, the pair of interesting black knickers and the miraculous black bra. Have a couple of practice runs at looking seductive by letting her hair fall over her face and looking up through her eyelashes. Check that she can still gasp and arch her back and say sentences like, "Oh baby, that was wonderful," and "Oh God, don't stop," while keeping a straight face. Commandeer a sister, preferably Anna, to look after the aforementioned child. Add a generous helping of whole red lipstick, several layers of black mascara, a short button-through purple, it is after all the colour of passion, dress, sexy black shoes with suede ankle straps, and 1 bottle of red wine. Always take care not to start swigging from the bottle of red wine before arriving at your destination. As an optional extra, condoms in the handbag are always a nice touch. If it's not possible to procure them, for example they may be out of season, you will have to make do with large amounts of self-restraint. Not always ideal, but it does work. Serve on a bed with a good-looking man. So again, it's just fun. The writing is so good for a debut novel. The writing in this book is just stunning in every way, and I just love it. So she goes to Adam's and he makes her dinner and they don't eat much, and the anticipation is ramping up and they end up upstairs and they have sex, and we get a really funny moment about the size of penises. And again, I'm not going to go into it because I've just read a big lengthy bit from the book, but the kind of discussion around, pretending it's huge and I won't pretend it's huge, and then the sex scene's really funny but really quite sexy at the same time, because she tries to do this thing of being coy but actually telling you what's happening at the same time. And again, as we know through the books that we've done in this podcast, it's difficult to write good sex scenes, but Marian Keyes does write good sex scenes and she writes them really well, and they are always well done. But I think this one is particularly well done because it's not, really graphic, but it gets the point across in a really sexy way. So there we go. She's had sex with Adam. It's went really well, and she then goes back home to her child, and she finds out that James is in Dublin, and the next day they have an awkward phone conversation and she invites him over. And when he comes over, it's a really awkward scene because he doesn't know the baby's name, he doesn't know anything about them, he's acting like a bit of a weirdo in some ways, she doesn't know how to act either. And my favourite bit of the scene is she offers him a coffee, and when she comes back with the coffee, she's furious, absolutely furious, because she's made him the way that he likes his coffee automatically, and she's raging that she didn't just hand him a black cup of coffee, because it shows him that he's still there in some way. And again, that's a tiny little moment, but it's so good, because I would do that. I would be like, oh damn, I wish I had been petty enough to think, I'm not going to make your coffee the way you like it and you can ask for it. And then she wants to keep it amicable and friendly, but she also wants to kill him. And again, I love that scene, and I love those scenes where, she's going backwards and forwards in her own narrative, her own narration and her monologue of, he's the father of my child and he was my husband, and I want things to be good, but by the same token I also want to murder him. Could I get away with murdering him, and that kind of thing. And it's really good. And then the novel takes a turn because he invites her to dinner, and they go to dinner, and she turns up looking really sexy and hot and confident, and James basically tells her that the reason why he left her for another woman was because of her. It was all her fault, that her behaviour is unreasonable, that she acts like a child, that she needs to change before she can come back, and he browbeats her, and it's horrible. Genuinely, it's a horrible scene. It's a horrible scene to read. And that's when I'm saying he is a shit. He is an absolute dickhead of a man. And she's so confused by this, but he's playing on her insecurities, so she takes it and she agrees to go back to London with him even though she doesn't want to. And honestly, that scene in the restaurant, it makes my flesh crawl, reading it again. It's horrible. It genuinely is horrible. And you're screaming at the book, don't go back to him, tell him fuck off, and just go and live your life and be with Adam, because we want you to be with Adam because Adam's lovely, and this guy's just horrible in every way, and so James is a great villain, and I do think he is a villain. I don't think there's another word I could use other than villain for James. He's just a prick in every way. So she agrees to go back to London, and she doesn't want to go. And then we have the most heartbreaking scene where she breaks up with Adam on the phone, and you know, it's that thing about, where if we can't be friends, then we can't be anything, then fine, we can't be anything to each other. And we know that she wants Adam and she really likes Adam, but she feels like she has to give her marriage another chance, and she's willing to kind of take the blame. And Helen's outraged when she hears what's happening and what he said, and Helen gets the situation straight away. And that's why I love Helen, because Helen is that ride or die where she will support you, but she'll also tell you when you're being an idiot. And she'll support your decision, but she will also just give you her opinion, and you can take it or leave it. And then when she's getting ready to go back to London, she has a phone call with a colleague of James's, George, in the office. She phones to ask James something, and he tells her that basically what James has told her is an absolute lie, that James has been heartbroken without her, and that, he realises he had made a mistake and it was all his fault. And Claire is completely nonplussed by this. And she doesn't know what to do, so she phones her friend Judy, who completely backs up George's version of events, and Claire realises that James has completely lied to her because he cannot admit he's in the wrong, and he has blamed her for everything that's happened, when in actual fact it's him, and he has played on her insecurities, and that he has been terribly underhanded to her. So she gets ready, and she leaves the baby with her mum, and she flies to London to confront him. And the confrontation scene is brilliant. She walks into their flat, he's not expecting her, she calls him out on all of this. He tries to fight back and tries to double down, and he's just horrible. Like, he is just a horrible person. Like, he's just horrible in every way. And she just says, right, we're done, essentially. She tells them that they're done, and it's a beautifully written scene, and it's a beautiful moment to see somebody who's been browbeaten by a partner so much get some gumption finally and just tell them to get in the sea. And it's good to see James getting his comeuppance a little bit. So she flies back to Dublin and starts to make her own arrangements for going back to London. And at that point, Helen comes running in and tells her that it turns out that Adam has a baby and a girlfriend, and she's heartbroken again. But she gets it, she had given up Adam. And we're heartbroken as well. But, by this point in the novel, I think we know what's going to happen. We don't think, even in the first book, I don't think any of us think that Marian Keyes is not going to give us the happy ending that we want. So she's making her plans to go back to London, and then one day when she's sitting outside with Anna and Kate in the sun, Helen brings Adam over to do some more studying, and the minute she sees him, the feelings just come flooding back. So she picks up the baby and tries to run away inside. But then he comes back to see her. He comes upstairs to see her, and they have a conversation, and it turns out that it's his ex-girlfriend, and yes, he does have a baby, but he hadn't been seeing the baby because his ex-girlfriend didn't want him seeing the baby, and now they're kind of getting their relationship back together, and he tells Kate that he really likes her. He tells Claire that he really likes her, and that it's a really lovely low-key scene, a bit like Emma. I think again the kind of final declaration is lovely and low-key, and I think maybe that's why these two books are good companions. Again, it's a quiet scene, it's not a big romantic moment, it is fairly quiet and nice. And then the book ends with Helen bursting into the room at the end and laughing about the whole situation, and turns out that she had a bet with somebody about Adam having a girlfriend, and that she'll win money, and that's how the book ends, is Helen crowing that things are going to go her way. And it's a really funny ending, and I love the way to end this book. And that's Watermelon. And again, I think I've already made it clear, this book is one to read. If you've never read this book, read it. If you have read it, do yourself a favour, go back and read it again. It's worth your time. It is 500 pages of perfection, in my opinion. It is just brilliant from start to finish. And I will not be leaving it another 10 years until I read it again, I can tell you that now. And this will not be the only Marian Keyes book that we will cover on this podcast, I can tell you that now. And yes, so that is our books for this month. As I've said, that will be the only time that we will be doing 2 books on this podcast. This has been an epic episode compared to the others, and it was an epic amount of work to pull the books together for this episode, so I will not be doing it again. But I hope if you read along you've enjoyed them, and if you haven't read them yet, I hope you do enjoy them if you read them. So to look forward to December. So December we are going to have a wee bit of a Christmas special, and for that book I decided to pick an author that I haven't read, which I know is really popular, and I've picked a Megan Quinn book, and the book that we've picked is How My Neighbour Stole Christmas. So our book in December is How My Neighbour Stole Christmas by Megan Quinn, and I hope that you can read along with me and that you'll join me for the Christmas special. And I will also be announcing the first 3 books for 2026 in the December episode as well. So thank you for joining me for this episode of the Warm and Fuzzy Book Club. I hope you enjoy the books, and I hope you have enjoyed the books. If you'd like to give me any recommendations, or if you'd like to get in touch, then you can get me at the email address, which is warmfuzzybookclub@gmail.com, or on Blue Sky and Instagram at warmfuzzybookclub. And please rate and review on your podcast app of choice, because that helps us get discovered by more people. Otherwise, I will see you in December for How My Neighbour Stole Christmas. Thank you. Bye.